For the peripheral observer, the madness of the past week in the UK might be summed up by a singular image: a group of white men in Leicester doing a Hitler salute. But for me, it's the image of a person of colour making it the exact same gesture in London that is far more illuminating. In fact, it's the different reactions, both listed across the political spectrum, that get us tantalisingly close to understanding how we've arrived at this grim moment. The first photo is a continuation of a theme embedded in public consciousness since the 1970s. He is the bad man, the bogeyman, the far-right neo-Nazi. You'll get no dissent from me there. Then the second comes along to complicate the narrative. Both images were taken on the same day in the same country, one at a racist protest, the other, well, at a racist protest? Sorry, I mean peace march for Gaza. With the UK's riots launching more hot takes than bricks, I hesitate to lob my own, but as someone whose multiple social media bubbles resemble Swiss cheese, I've noticed something that is key to all this. There is a near universal unwillingness to call out the extremes of our own tribes, especially when doing so complicates our own favourite narrative. To deny is to tolerate, is to justify, is to embolden. When rioters initially gathered in Southport last week, some sections of the right went into overdrive to dismiss the presence and impact of the far right. These thugs were just white working class, many insisted. They were shocked and scared and angry by the terrible murder of 3 young girls, or merely frustrated by unfettered immigration. Of course, there's nothing wrong being angry about mass migration, let alone the murder of children. And I'm sure that many who took to the streets did so out of sheer frustration. But come on. There were also a lot of proper, actual, hardcore racists there. Rocks were thrown at Filipino nurses on their way to helping people. A hotel believed to be housing asylum seekers was set alight. An Asian man was assaulted making his way down the road. You'd think the right would be more inured to such gaslighting, more aware of the pitfalls of succumbing to self-denial. The right has rightly criticised the left for wallowing in these tactics. Things were especially bad during the Corbyn era. If the then Labour leader had just put up his hands at the first accusations of anti-Semitism and said, yeah, the left's not perfect, I'm not perfect, I'll work on it, history might have played out differently. On the other side of the coin, Keir Starmer's disastrous public responses to the riots threatened to make a bad situation worse. Shutting down racist violence was, of course, the immediate priority. But in Labour's narrative, everyone concerned about migration is just a few untrue social media posts away from being a far-right rioter. There was no nod at all to the legitimate concerns of many across the country who would never dream of rioting. And when people don't feel listened to, that's a recipe for disaster. Most damaging of all, Starmer is attempting to dismiss concerns about two-tier policing as the stuff of far-right fantasies. He's taking an axe to what is ironically the most unifying British value, our sense of fairness. Lock away the violent, great. Set the police on them, lovely stuff. There's no place on our streets for racism, absolutely. But please, do it to all of them. The British people are not stupid. We have eyes. When a police car was overturned and a bus set alight in Hare Hills last month, no police. When gangs of Muslim youths roamed around Birmingham with weapons this week, no police. When a man was beaten up outside a pub, his liver lacerated, no police. When journalists were chased away to chants of F the Jews and their tyres were slashed, no police. No finger-pointing from Starmer, no use of the term far-right either. Which brings us back to the Sieg Heil photo at last week's Gaza march. The man raised his arm proud and straight at a group of Jews. In the background, 2 young women, 2 anti-racists, allies of the same cause, giggle. In the video from which the image is taken, other self-professed anti-racists saunter by. No one challenges him. No one is concerned. That the police later did arrest the man was almost certainly at the insistence of those he targeted with his gesture. No doubt they will have had to collect the evidence themselves. Certainly it won't have been the doing of the protest organisers. Those same organisers have assiduously turned a blind eye to the continuous and multiple examples of racism that plague their marches. Clearly, different rules apply here. When a man performs a Hitler salute on a Palestine demonstration, there is no soul-searching. When cranks and Islamists smash the windows of businesses because of some vague connection to Israel, they are said to be protesters, not rioters. For 10 months, left-wingers have failed to call out the hatred and racism in their midst, and thus the extremes of their group have become emboldened. The superpower of being British is spotting baloney and calling it out. It's why we've been the first country to emerge blinking into reality from the madness of gender ideology. The regular people of this country can spot hypocrisy a mile away from whichever group it's coming from. So, when the police attempt to justify their different levels of policing criminal behaviour, we should all call it out. When a procession of cars full of Islamists drives through a Jewish neighbourhood in London chanting they'll rape their daughters, and they don't get charged despite the evidence of the culprits, we should all call it out. When two men, one white, one not, proudly partake in a Nazi salute at separate demonstrations, we should all, well, you get the idea. Right, let's get the thoughts of my panel. GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, journalist and communications advisor Linda Doomley, and he's not arrived yet, but former Conservative MP and farmer Neil Parish. Hello, thank you so much for being here on time.
Hi. I think probably Neil is driving down the M4 on a tractor. It's taking him so long to get here.
So how are you both?
We're good, thank you. I won't speak for you, but
I am.
You seemed good earlier on.
Yep.
Cool, well, thank you so much for being here. It's Sunday evening. Very much appreciated. Do you have any thoughts, initial thoughts on my monologue?
Well, I mean, this whole thing about two-tier policing, which seemed to be the idea there, there was one that you mentioned, which was the guy getting beaten up outside the pub. Now, I think I saw that was the video I actually saw. I couldn't see any police in that video. Yeah. So if there had been police there, they'd been standing by doing nothing, yes, I'd have said that's two-tier policing. If they weren't there, I don't know why, I don't know if anyone knows why, but they weren't able to actually do anything. And so when it comes to the demonstrations, the pro-Palestinian marches, I think that the police have to work out with 300,000 people marching. What they're not going to do is to put public safety at risk. Now, I've covered loads of demonstrations, and some of them have turned into a riot in an instant. It's a bit like a pub brawl. They come out of nowhere, and so the police have to be very careful that what they do is not to actually rage things up. So some of the policing of the demonstrations, as far as I can see, have been along those lines to keep everyone calm.
I totally understand that policing is a very difficult thing. I don't do it, and I'm very grateful for that, frankly, because I don't have the temperament or the physique. But I just want to say two things, and maybe you can respond to this, Linda, is, first of all, I would say that there doesn't seem to be any qualms about how they were far-right people there, absolutely. Those riots were policed, I'd say, number one. There wasn't concern of it becoming a Tinder thing. The shields were out. But I also would like to say another thing about the lack of police in Birmingham, because we know now from a police spokesperson, what he said was, we deliberately stayed away because we'd spoken to the community leaders. And that led to then men with machetes on the street and the violence that we saw. So it was a policing decision, a very conscious one, that led to that man being hurt. Sorry, Linda.
I think what you have to do is try and understand the position of the police right now. So let me say, first of all, straight off the bat, that I think the police did an incredibly good job. So you might describe them as authoritarian, but I think they took a robust position in dealing with this situation and in instigating swift justice. I think justice had to be done, and it had to be seen to be done and seen to be done quickly. Now, I've spoken to several senior police officers this week. They retired, but they retain vast knowledge of the police service, and they get concerned about three things: resources, money, and police officers, men and women. They get very concerned that they've become treated as service operators, which takes them away from the traditional job of policing. And they also don't like the police force being politicised in any way. Those three things, they believe, have really neutered the police service in this country. And they're starting to miss their top band of very experienced officers that have been through the mill, that can bring vast knowledge to these situations. So when we talk about the nitty-gritty of what has gone on this week, we've got to look at the police force and how they're going to cope, how they did cope, which I think was brilliantly, and how they're going to cope when these things flare up again, which will happen, I think, relatively soon.
I agree with some of the footage we saw from Southport, and to think that
some of those same police officers
were involved in what the incident earlier in the week. Anyway, I don't want
Trying to apprehend the assailant that killed the 3 girls.
I guess the issue isn't about the response to those far-right riots. I would say the issue that people see in terms of two-tier policing is the hypocrisy when other violent people are out on the streets and not seen to have that similar response.
But I think the issue people seeing at the moment, they want to see this being controlled. I'm not saying that what you're saying isn't important, but it's a question of timing. What people want to see now is they want to see the police grip the situation, and then they want to see some attempt to address the underlying reasons why it happened.
And a question of degree. I mean, the riots were the worst street violence we've seen since 2011. On the pro-Palestinian marches, you haven't seen anything like that. They've been largely...
We have seen violence.
Nothing like it.
Nothing like you saw in Southport or Liverpool or various other towns across Britain. So on the basis of that, we had proper riots. We haven't had proper riots with the pro-Palestinians.
We've had windows smashed. We've had...
There have been problems, yeah, absolutely.
And in terms of, just to address your thing, timing in terms of moving on, is that you're right, it is about timing, but there are a lot of people who argue that there hasn't been... That timing has not been there for 10 months, and possibly that's part of what's led us to this. Anyway, let's move on.